I certainly didn't want to take away from Representative Fields' ability to hear the answer to the question that he had posed. But I saw him talking to you, and that's what we were discussing.
He just asked me if he could ask another question.
Right, so that's all we were talking about. I do have the original language here before it was amended, so I'll leave that with you. And it was a Class A misdemeanor, and it only applied to New Hampshire law enforcement in the original language. So it's possible, as you suggest, that we just go back to that language. And we don't, that way federal officials are not in any danger to follow their orders. And state law enforcement face nothing more than a misdemeanor. And I understand I'm not allowed to discuss the fact that the underlying premise, and Representative Fields is not very familiar with what the NDAA does. You're not allowed to make the claim that you're not a terrorist when they throw you in the hole. And it does seem awfully Orwellian that we're so worried about the police officers with their bulletproof vests and their tanks, but we're not worried about the poor little protester who's being targeted by the federal government. And they are, as a matter of fact, being targeted by the federal government. Protesters.
We're talking about...
I'm talking about the penalty phase.
What penalty are they going to get then?
The protesters, when they're grabbed? Well,
if they're not grabbed, but they're protesting, and one of them is arrested.
The FBI, there were documents that were turned over by the FBI last month under a Freedom of Information request. They were investigating Occupy Wall Street protesters under counter-terrorism measures, meaning they would call a protester a terrorist. And if they did grab that protester here in New Hampshire, and the protesters in New Hampshire are starting their trial this week before a jury for their hideous crime of being in a public park after dark. Okay? Now, if they were grabbed by that federal agent and called a terrorist, they wouldn't be sitting in a courtroom in Manchester in the Superior Court. They'd be in a dank hole somewhere, possibly in Gitmo itself. And there are people that have been held now, people in Gitmo that have already been determined to be not terrorists are still being held there. And I encourage you to go and look it up on the internet that they started a hunger strike this week. They'd rather just starve and die now than stay there any longer. So it really is Orwellian.
The internet is just about as truthful as nothing.
Good. I'd like to talk about truth, as a matter of fact, because I'm curious how we end up here in this room right now.
We ended up here because there is a penalty on this
That's
bill.
right. And the penalty was added in that first committee. And if I was a cynical person, I'd ask why. If somebody wanted to orchestrate this situation so that you could vote yes, as you did, madam, on the floor of the House a couple days ago, and Mr. Fields, if somebody wanted to be able to be on record as being in sympathy with this bill, but be able to kill it anyway, you couldn't have done a better thing than to change the bill the way it was changed in the first committee. So I hope that...
Let me explain to you what happened.
Yes, please.
There was a committee.
Yes, I was there.
They put an amendment in. When it came to the floor of the House, it only said Liberty Act. It never said anything about a penalty as stiff as this one. When I read the bill the first time, it was a Class A misdemeanor. There's a lot of difference between a felony and a misdemeanor. And that's why I voted for it. So we'll get off that.
Well, it said that it was amended when you voted for it. It said as amended. And it also was explained before the vote took place that there had been a mistake and the cart had been put before the horse. I was specifically told that leadership, as in Representative Shurtleff, was in agreement that it would be voted on that day on the floor and sent back to committee. And the chairman of the original committee stood before all of you and said, I made a mistake, and it needs to be sent back to committee. And he was cut off. And
that's right, this is a mistake with the penalty that's on it.
All right, let me read to you RSA 643.
I'm not interested.
This is about police officers.
Well, Madam Chair, I just want to remind the witnesses of the meeting next door, she should keep her
voice
down.
Let me read to you 641:8. This is current
I'm not
law.
interested in that.
Ma'am,
interested in
law.
what you feel about the penalty, and that's all.
All right. What I feel about the penalty is, like Article 18 of our Constitution says, all penalties ought to be proportioned to the nature of the offense. No wise legislature will affix the same punishment to the crime of theft, forgery, and the like, which they do to those of murder and treason, where the same undistinguishing severity is exerted against all offenses. The people are led to forget the real distinctions in the crimes themselves and commit the most flagrant with as much and as little compunction as they do the lightest offenses. I like that it could possibly be a felony. Somebody asked, well, what else could it be? It could be any number of things. The police didn't have to actually grab you and put you in the back of a cruiser. Maybe you provided information to the federal agent. Maybe what you did isn't a felony. Maybe I'm a cynical and suspicious person unnecessarily. And when the language was changed, it was because they understood we have no idea what somebody might do to aid and abet. It could be as small as a misdemeanor. It could be a felony. We don't know. But it is already
came in that committee.
It is already state law that a police officer can be accused and found guilty of a crime in his duty. Listen to what it says.
I know what it says.
RSA 641:3. Do you know what that says?
I'm asking you what you have to say about this penalty. That's all we're dealing with.
Okay, I'm listening to you worried that it's outrageous that a police officer stands to be charged with a crime, and I'm telling you it's already in state law that it's available to be done. And I don't believe you're familiar with the law.
It's probably very true, but this here says it's definitely going to happen.
No, it says they have to knowingly. They have to knowingly. And you know what? If you want to strip the language out and leave it undefined and no penalty at all, I will gladly, humbly thank you from the bottom of my heart. But if you retain the bill, I'll know in my heart that this was all a farce and a way to kill this bill and stop it without having to come out and vote against it. That's what I will honestly believe. Because
you have a right to your beliefs.
That's what I think
you live here.
It will show. Because there's no reason to retain the bill. You can strip the language out that offends you.
Go ahead.
Of the 4 options that I posed to the previous person testifying, I believe you have ruled out retain.
Retain, yes.
But you've given me mixed signals on the other 3 options. You seem to have said at one point you like the idea of a penalty being possible, which would say we should leave it as it is. You said at one point you'd be happy with the misdemeanor. You said at another point we could strip it entirely. Which of those 3 remaining options?
Whichever will get it out of this committee alive and back onto the floor of the House tomorrow so that we can let our federal delegation know we do not accept the language that they have written into the federal law. If the only way to do that is to not have it be defined as a crime, and it was a Class A misdemeanor before it was changed, and I'll hand you that, hand you that original language. If the only way to do that is to not even make it be a misdemeanor, then I'll accept that and I'll be happy for it, because it's all
The question is, which of those 3 options would you prefer?
Would I prefer?
Yes.
I prefer to say it's a felony to take a citizen of this country, and specifically this state, and to throw them in a hole for the rest of their life without trial. Because if that is not a felony, then I don't think we really need to have any defined at all. And, you know, people that are afraid of the 10th Amendment Center or whatever, I don't even know what that is. So that is not at issue here. I am a New Hampshire citizen. I have no connection to the 10th Amendment Center, whatever that is. I do know that we nullified federal law on the floor of the House by a voice vote before we did this one a couple days ago. And they nullified the fact that industrial hemp, actually you people were involved in it. Thank you very much. I'm very bravo. That was an excellent job, as a matter of fact. So federal law is nullified.
Okay, is there any other questions for this young lady? Seeing none, thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, and I'll leave this with you too. These are instances in the press where the FBI says that protesters are terrorists.
Everybody has a right to their own opinion.
It's not opinion,
That's
ma'am.
why we're living in this country.
It was a federal requests a Freedom of Information Act. It's FBI documents that were finally turned over after a good, long, hard fight. Yes, you are entitled to your opinion, but not your own facts. I agree.